Got to be Westlanders, welcome to the Lost Holotapes channel, where we delve into the historical lore of the Fallout and more recently shifted our focus to fan-made narrative mods. Today we'll cast our gaze upon a series of mods created by a huge member of the mod-making community, the Overseer, during the period from 2016 to 2022. This series consisting of 5 mods can be considered complete, as unfortunately, the Overseer concluded his modding career despite initial plans to create a series comprising 11 mods. You can support another extremely important creator by smashing that like button, subscribing, leaving a comment, checking out a ton of interesting links in the description. For those new to the channel, I recommend starting with the Holotapes series from the first episode, as the narrative is sequential. I also suggest watching the episode dedicated to the mod working on the Chain Gang, in which I discuss the rules for working with fun mods because there will be my author alterations to the storyline in the Overseer series. There are plenty of other interesting links in the description. Let's begin the immersion into the lore. Before retiring at the peak of his career, the Overseer released numerous mods, including narrative ones that, although together form a cohesive picture complementing each other, do not require a strict sequential completion. The series includes mods Initiation, Eliza, Headhunting, the North Road, and Depth of Depravity. That's a whopping 5 mods, not counting the High Desert, which was more of a joke mode. These mods range from 1000 to 2000 endorsements, placing them in the C tier. Surprisingly, their conversion rates are not very impressive, they're all about 6.5%. Personally, I found these mods quite solid and engaging, which is very important for one of the longest running mod series. They have a good storyline that doesn't dissipate as the narrative progresses, very high quality voice acting, dialogues, characters overall, quests are varied enough, and the game world changes and reacts to what's happening. The first mod, the Initiation, is based on the story of the Huns and their difficulties with relocation from the Mojave, which is great because I believe their potential was not explored enough in the original Fallout New Vegas. If the Initiation is a series of sequential questlines, then Eliza is a companion mode, connected with a character of the same name. This time the story will revolve around the criminal world of Freeside and Vegas, drugs, the porn industry, underground casinos, and so on. All these themes I think could have been better explored in the original Fallout as well. The third mod, Headhunting, is a set of 30 bounty quests. Not that it advances the plot much, but it provides a lot of additional exposition on the characters, including those already met, as many characters that the player is supposed to hunt down are not random. The fourth mod, the North Road, introduces a new region northeast of Vegas, and the player has to search for the son of an NCR senator on the run. The fifth mod will immerse us deeply into the corrupt and dirty world of big politics, and tell us the sorry fate tale of those who challenge this world. Holotapes dedicated to the Overseer series are reissues. After the release of the original episodes on my primary channel, I managed to establish contact with the Overseer and get valuable lore comments that make this whole story much more logical than it sounded originally. Actually, from him I learned that there were even 6 more mods planned, which were supposed to further advance and ultimately conclude the storylines. Unfortunately, the world is unlikely to see this mod, so I am using that small portion of lore taken from raw design documents that the Overseer shared with me, for which I am really grateful. But I'll tell you more about the concepts of these mods in the next episode. Today we'll touch only on the exposition lore. In addition, I decided to include within the discussion of the lore of the Overseer series, the lore of the Indian Springs mod. The thing is, while exploring both modes, I found some elements that can be connected with each other, in particular the high desert prison introduced by Indian Springs, but which can be used in the narrative of the Overseer mods. It's quite funny, Indian Springs introduced a location without lore, and Overseer introduced lore without a location. When communicating with the Overseer and discussing the possible merging of the mod's lore, I got the green light from him, so don't get mad at me, I got approval. But first let me properly introduce the Indian Springs mod. Indian Springs is a very strange mod. It doesn't seem to do much, but for some reason it left a strong impression on me and stuck with me. The mod was released by Ferengario in 2014 and still has a very impressive conversion rate, almost 12%, making it one of the most highly rated in the community. This mod was released in 2 parts. The second part was unfinished and unfortunately will never be completed. When I played the mod, I accidentally started with the second section, not the first, and it greatly distorted my perception of the lore at that time. One of the strongest moments of the mod, worthy of attention, is how the author tried in creating exterior locations, at least those he finished. In the way many overturned trucks from bomb explosions are arranged and buildings destroyed, I could read the story and was getting special vibes from it. When talking about Indian Springs, it's worth noting its biggest advantage. Its events take place outside of New Vegas and allow us to explore new regions on the map. This is exactly the lore that is truly unique because a new wasteland is a blank canvas, and most likely nothing except this mod will ever explore the introduced territory. Therefore, mods that expand the geography, especially for us, are available. Specifically, this mod opens up a passage northwest of Vegas to a new subregion called the North Desert, the center of which is the pre-war town of Indian Springs. The second part of the mod takes us deeper into the Nevada wasteland along Highway 95 to the Goldfield area subregion, with the centers being the pre-war towns of Goldfield and Tonopah. Of course, the subregions could have been named more interestingly, but for now we'll stick to the author's version. Overall, I'm very glad that we'll find ourselves back in Tonopah, which, although only mentioned, was part of the lore of Fallout of Nevada. Let's start with the exposition of the Indian Springs mod. Near the small real-life town of Indian Springs was a real military airfield, Creech Air Force Base, or more precisely, the town itself was an appendage to the military base. Because of this, the town and the base were subjected to massive bombardment, becoming a highly radioactive zone inhabited by feral ghouls. The town and the base personnel perished. Below Creech Air Force Base was Bunker Creech, where military personnel and civilians evacuated, who was able to. The bunker, as an isolated self-sufficient settlement, continued to develop in a military disciplinary form. It is led by military personnel. North of Indian Springs was another military base, Camp Mercury, which the mod author inexplicably placed in Goldfield area. At this base, which also had an airstrip in the game, people took shelter in a bunker and perished in February 2078 due to leaking radiation. What's interesting is that this camp was used as a test site for the Desert Rock nuclear tests, which corresponds to a real-life prototype, at least by territory, because north of Mercury is the dried-up Frenchman Lake, where a town was built and bombed with nuclear charge during tests in the 50s, and only a bank safe remains of it. In the actual test complex, as far as I understand, surviving personnel turned into ghouls. In the game, this aggressive faction is called the Ravaged. Since I can't say anything definite about them because they lack exposition and the quest associated with them is broken beyond repair, I will ignore this faction. Apparently, this is the part of the mod that Ferengari didn't finish. High Desert Prison is another location that the author transferred from real life to the mod, for which he deserves great respect. I love it when Fallout lore is based on real prototypes. On October 23rd, the inmates apparently staged a riot and left the prison. On the very next day after the war started, a group of 54 military personnel came to the prison, evacuating civilians from Creech Air Force Base, while the base's dispatchers and leadership remained to direct incoming planes so they wouldn't crash. On October 28th, the inmates returned to the prison, apparently realizing that the prison was the best place to survive. There were more of them than military personnel, so they managed to drive away the new cellmates. Only 33 people from the group of military personnel survived and returned to Indian Springs, trying to find weapons and supplies. Most likely the group perished there. In the episode on the early history of Nevada, I already mentioned Goldfield, but I'll repeat it again for the context. The town of Goldfield survived the war and the subsequent 200 years. It is isolated from other cities, protected by rocks, and connected to Highway 95 through a tunnel. Its culture has become polycentric. Everyone walks around like astronauts in gear, helmets, and with batons. Although the mod introduces Tonopah, it does not take into account the existing lore of Fallout of Nevada. Both mods came out in 2015, so it's not surprising. Nevertheless, we will prioritize Fallout of Nevada because it is a total conversion mod versus an unfinished mod of lesser significance. According to Fallout of Nevada, the city ghoulified during the war, and the last ghoul went feral by 2100. Indian Springs, on the other hand, claims that the city survived the war and lived until the Divide event, during which it perished due to the fissures that formed. According to the concept, most of the city collapsed into the fissure and the surviving people left the city. I am not a geologist seismologist, I don't know if it's scientifically possible for the explosion in Hopeville to create fissures in Tonopah, especially since there are over 150 kilometers straight between them, and in the nearest region, Vegas, there are no fissures, and there are none on the way to Tonopah either. What can I say? In Fallout, many things requiring scientific justification are written with a light hand. Nevertheless, I will stick to the lore of Fallout of Nevada. Okay, finally we're starting talking about the Overseer mods. And let's start with geography. The plot of 4 out of 5 mods in the Overseer series takes place in the Vegas area, but one of them, the North Road, is set in the similarly named territory northeast of the city. The actual geography of the area differs somewhat from what we see in the mod. It's more desert-like, without canyons, and doesn't end at a snowy mountain. I'd say the North Road as a world space could have had more features and be generally more logic, but regardless of that, expansion of territories is something we all love, especially when it's supported by a good story. Alright, 2077. In the Mojave, a new shelter appears, the Riverside Bunker on the Colorado River. This bunker was a laboratory complex where 4 scientists were developing bioweapons, including the plague. At some point, one scientist died from the plague, another escaped, the third slit his veins, and the fourth overdosed on sleeping pills after completing all available research almost 30 years after the war. At the same time, the scientists were aware of the futility of their activities, but apparently routine work gave some meaning to their lives. In the northern Mojave, in the Sheep Mountains, a hillbilly family, the Badin clan, settled, more likely even before the war, creating their incest dynasty and not allowing any blood mixing. In addition to their specific attitude towards family values, the family's main asset was moonshine production. I wouldn't be surprised if it replaced milk for newborns. Moonshine production is also a rite of initiation and entry into adulthood, which they conduct when a Badin turns 10. If a kid manages to mess up and fail the exam, they are kicked out into the wasteland. By 2250, one of the significant political figures in the NCR is the corrupt Senator Henry Bork, actively using his official position for selfish purposes. He owns one of the Brahmin ranches in California. Henry has a cousin, Austin Burke, who is a priest and in 2250 founded a network of parish schools for orphans called the Path of Light Ministries. The schools help orphans and lost young people, providing them with shelter, food, and education. However, behind the veil of virtue, there is still the same cynical soul. In reality, the Path of Light engaged in human trafficking, especially of children, including for intimate purposes. Formally, I will introduce the Burke's Goons faction, because there will be some factions in the Mojave that will have to deal with these gentlemen. In or before 2250, a settlement called Holbrook appears in Arizona on the site of the pre-war town. In this town lived a gigantic boy named Hodder with his equally well-built brothers. But then came the Legion. As the Legion advanced south, the town was captured around the 50s, coinciding with Hodder's age. He was separated from his brothers, trained for the army, and given a new name, Hercules. His brothers were sent to the slave pens. In Texas, a group of slavers forms under Tex Bradshaw. Before 2256, a slave trading house run by Eugene Schrader appears on the west side. At that time, Schrader was a very serious and influential mobster whom few dared to cross. Wanderers, it's time to use one of the techniques of authorial polishing of modes. Last time, while discussing the war trash mode, we introduced the Zealous faction into the narrative, which is also located in the west side. I would like to merge these two factions into one, since having two slave syndicates located basically next door to each other would definitely lead to the war, especially considering Eugene's temper. Criminal organizations are territorial entities, with strict division of influence zones. Eugene Schrader was given much more exposition, so I will give preference to him. But further in the narrative, I will adapt the lore related to the word trash. Around 2256, in this insane world, a girl named Charlotte is born. When she was just 1 month old, her parents sold her for some caps to Schrader's lieutenant, who then resold her to some other slave-owning raiders from Southern California. About 20 years before the events of Fallout New Vegas, Sheridan's gang emerged in the region, which, as he himself called it, was fighting for freedom. But of course, this was not a group of anarchist romantics. These cruel scoundrels were deeply involved in slave trading and senseless violence at the level of Mexican cartels. Sheridan himself was an incredible psychopath and narcissist who enjoyed skinning people under hallucinogenic drugs. According to the lore of unpublished mode of the same name, his base was supposed to be a prison. Can you feel this smile spreading across my face? Of course, I want to put Sheridan in the High Desert Prison, which was introduced in the Indian Springs mod and in 2281 serves as the home of default raiders without any lore, especially since Overseer didn't mind such an interpretation. Thus, around the year 2261, the High Desert Prison becomes the home of Sheridan's gang. Charlie's new owners, who actually gave her a name because her parents didn't even bother, psychologically tortured her from a young age, forcing her to obey any command, completely breaking her will and emotionally destroying her, not even mentioning physical and sexual abuse. It certainly left a deep trauma on the kid. The slave owners found amusement in a gladiatorial arena where slaves fought to the death, much like in the pit. They especially liked children fights. Never feeling empathy, Charlie was a perfect killing machine. She was never reluctant when thrown in the pit. One fine day, a hired assassin visited the slave owners, carrying out a contract. He slaughtered the entire group and upon leaving, freed the slaves. Angered children attacked Charlie altogether, but she was able to massacre them in return. The mercenary silently watched the carnage, and when Charlie finished, he offered to teach her his art. Thanks to her complete emotional detachment and years of training and fieldwork, Charlie became a professional assassin. She had no emotional attachment to the assassin either, although he essentially replaced her family. When he died of natural causes, she inherited his equipment, weapons, contracts, disposed of the body, and continued her professional activities. When the NCR entered the Mojave, the mining town of New Rockwell appeared in the Mesquite Valley. As the mod author clarified, the old Rockwell is likely the place where the founder of the settlement originated, and it is not directly related to the specific settlement. 2272, the Road Snake gang operates on the North Road. They establish a base called Madsen, completely blocking the passage between the cliffs. Somewhere in between 74 and 77, Schrader tried to blackmail Sheridan. He demanded firstly Sheridan's territory of influence and secondly a percentage of the slave trade. To intimidate him, he sent a super mutant along with the message, but the super mutant never returned. Sheridan's henchman, intellectually deficient brother of Hayder, whom Sheridan bought from the Legion, tore the super mutant to pieces and even attempted to violate its corpse. Sheridan sends a retaliatory letter to Schrader asking him not to overstep his bounds and also to mourn, as Sheridan found members of Schrader's family and burned them after skinning them. For additional intimidation, one of Sheridan's lieutenants attacked Schrader's subordinates. He even found, killed and nailed the body of Charlie's former owner to the door of Schrader's office in West Side. Unfortunately, Schrader doesn't realize that he is already too old to compete with the younger criminals. Now, let's talk about the exposition of the main character of the mod, Eliza Kinney. The girl grew up in a snowy northern Utah, living in an isolated house with her father. They did some trading with a certain settlement, which had no connection to the Mormons. She says that the 80s destroyed the settlement while she was still there. Considering that she's around 20 and she left home when she was 17, the settlement was destroyed before 2278. On June 1st of 2278, entrepreneur Louis Marquez completes the restoration work at the pre-war casino he had previously found, Casa Madrugada, turning it into an elite club for wealthy gentlemen. After completing the work, he poisons all the contractors and buries them in the desert. On August 8th, Louis cuts the ribbon and opens the doors of his establishment, having previously received the first batch of escorts, 7 in total, from Schrader. The Path of Light opens its branch in the Mojave. Interestingly, they use the same building as the slave auction from the second part of the War Trash in 2283. Who knows, maybe after the Path of Light ceased its activities in the Mojave in 82, the building was inhabited by new owners, so the mods do not mutually exclude each other in this regard. Before 2279, in Freeside, an entrepreneur Roy Sullivan from Georgia establishes Sullivan's Den, a strip club/bar. Roy has connections with the Omitted and is involved in various underground businesses in the area, including extorting the North Vegas porn studio owned by Benny Alberta. While traveling from Georgia with the caravan, Roy fell into an ambush by raiders who began to execute hostages. By selling them a junkie companion and offering to serve as bait for the raiders, thus allowing the first group to ambush a rival gang, Roy saved his caravan. They were released after the raider group became the most dominant in the region, and the caravan owner gave Roy all his caps, which he used to start his business in Vegas. This likely happened east of Arizona, maybe in Alabama or Mississippi. Hercules from Holbrook quickly rises through the ranks of the Legion. Due to his zeal, cruelty, and combat merits, he is promoted to the position of Centurion. The Legion's high command was so confident in his loyalty that they completely overlooked his true nature, and Hercules always remembered that his name was Hayder. In the North Road region, Tex Bradshaw's slavers take over the Rio Grande Hotel Casino complex after he leaves Texas with his equally ruthless sons and accomplices. 5 raider gangs operate in the North Road region under the leadership of Samir in East Tunnel, Steak Knife in Blade Cave, El Generalissimo in Hennigan Armory, Worm in Lawson Cavern, and 20K in the Trench. On January 1st of 2279, Roy Sullivan proposes to Luis Marquez to open an underground poker club for high-ranking NCR officials at Casa Madrugada, in addition to the brothel, for those who prefer not to be seen in the strip's official establishments. Apparently, the deal didn't go through. In the Road Snake settlement, the leader of the gang is killed by a lone female tough traveler, who also forced his second-in-command to relinquish control of the town in her favor. Becoming a leader and realizing that Madsen has the opportunity to build an economy and generate greater income from trade than from robbing rare travelers, she restructures her outpost into a full-fledged city where lawlessness is not tolerated and new settlers can reside. The city establishes a motel, a shop, a weapons store, a saloon, and also sets up a border checkpoint, charging an exorbitant fee of 1,000 caps for passage through the city. The gang as a faction transforms into a militia. The Legion, under the command of Centurion Hercules from Holbrook, arrives on the North Road. He brings a squad of legionnaires for possible reinforcement in the region and to seek allies. He establishes contact with Tex Bradshaw and begins trading slaves with him. However, as soon as he gets the opportunity, he sheds the orange skirt, takes back the name Hayder given to him at birth. He secretly creates Hayder's army and conglomerate of 5 raider groups operating in the region. He orders his new friends to ambush the legionaries, whom he himself fled into a trap. After the massacre, he establishes his base, Fort Hayder, on the site of a former gas station. Hayder's philosophy of life is simple. War is the goal itself. You need to kill everyone indiscriminately and leave no legacy behind. He relishes the thought that when he dies, his lieutenants will fight for his throne. There is constantly infighting amongst them. Hader's coalition poses a constant threat to Madsen and to travelers seeking refuge, unwilling to be under the NCR of the Legion and who were lured by rumors of the free territory. Coincidentally, Eliza was part of the gang for a brief period and was based in the trench until she opened her eyes to the people she was surrounded by. On April 15th of 2280, a serious conflict erupts between Eugene Schrader and Louis Marcus. Schrader demands that Marcus purchase more slave girls from him and threatens him in response to his refusal to make the deal. Marcus currently has 12 employees and has no plans to expand his staff. Before 2281, Eugene Schrader, or Zala in War Trash, establishes a partnership with Hale's syndicate from New Reno. A certain Soul and his sons organize Soul's Saloon in the north of North Square. Joe Tooley, a retired bounty hunter, founds Tooley headhunting agency near Grop and Gulp. A new faction emerged in the region, gang of Frederick Przybylski, calling himself Big Daddy. The gang settles in Fort Cavern near Bitter Springs. This gang is a direct antagonist to the Great Huns and competes with them for the right to be assimilated into the region. Destroying opponents is a demonstration of loyalty to the Legion. But Frederick has a more significant reasons to desire the death of the Mongols. It turns out that Big Daddy had a son, Karl, recruited and killed in the NCR army by the Huns. I would like to make a remark and express a compliment to the Overseer's approach in creating modes. Unlike the traditional approach where the exposition of certain characters and events is almost entirely given in the installments dedicated to them, in this series the exposition is distributed. If in the initiation mode we perceive the conflict between the Huns and Big Daddy as a struggle for the attention of the Legion, only in the North Road do we learn that the conflict is much more personal. Frederick was Sheridan's mentor and tried to recruit him into his crew, but he refused because he considered that having aspirations of being called the future Legate Big Daddy at the age of 71 is the pinnacle of cringe. I can disagree. Sheridan is a more well-known and intimidating figure in the region compared to Big Daddy. He has achieved more recognition than his mentor, so descending from the level of a rock star to the level of a garage band clearly doesn't appeal to him. By 2281, a bunker on the Colorado River partially collapsed and the residential part was inhabited by the River Rats tribe. Before 2281, somewhere southeast of New Vegas, the settlement of Brighton emerges. Its residents do not support either the NCR or the Legion. In the North Road region, a group of mercenaries under the command of General Brandis appears, based at the North Wind Power Station. Tex Bradshaw's slavers managed to mess with Madsen early on, possibly by enslaving some of the town's residents, prompting Madsen to offer a bounty for any of Bradshaw's heads. Sheridan's gang has two raider outposts, Solitaire and Road Cafe, controlling the southern and northern approaches to the prison respectively. Like the prison in the original Indian Springs mod, they were populated by default raiders. Let's return to discussing the lore of Indian Springs, by the way. A fairly large group of raiders inhabited the deserted Tonopah by building makeshift bridges across the rifts. Ryder's raiders settled on the old oil platform north of the city. His group constantly raids Goldfield, keeping it on edge. Apparently, policing and discipline in the city were justified in this case. The oil platform itself exploded 3 days before the war, killing 45 people and incinerating half of the local forest. Presumably it was a Chinese sabotage, who also certainly carried out sabotage in Mercury. 2281, the Enclave remnants, which probably have the right to exist somewhere in Nevada, like the remnants in the Mojave, attempted to breach into the Creech bunker. The bunker's residents were still alive and refused to open the gear doors, thinking that outside were either communists or just some con artists who wanted to take the bomb, which had not yet been launched from the depths of the complex. 5 days after the contact, the bunker's reconnaissance squad saw a vertibird flying over Indian Springs. There is no joking around with the Enclave. They found a way to breach the doors and somehow attract feral ghouls from the city and direct them inside, where they mauled the survivors. 4 people survived who left the bunker and died later while trying to cross Indian Springs. During the quest, players can eliminate the Enclave vertibird crew in Indian Springs and launch the rocket at China, but globally it doesn't change anything. Goldfield eliminates Ryder's raider group and conducts a reconnaissance expedition to Tonopah. However, the expedition falls into a raider ambush set up there and barricades themselves on the upper floors of an office building, trying to call for help. The courier arrives to aid them, clearing the town of raiders and blowing up the bridges built across the rifts so the raiders cannot follow the evacuating group. But we can infer that there was just a second Goldfield expedition trying to save the first one. And that's basically the end of the lore of Indian Springs. Let's return to the Overseer's modes. April 2281. Sheridan's gang seizes the town of Brighton, although it would be more accurate to say that the town agrees to shelter him, seeing him as a fighter against the NCR. For some reason, the NCR's influence was less appealing to them than the raiders' habit of skinning people. A substantial reward was offered by the NCR for Sheridan's head, and for many bounty hunters, it was a matter of business reputation. Caleb Alquist and his crew were among them. In June, while hunting Sheridan, he reached Brighton, where essentially slaughtered the entire population, including women and children, in an attempt to flush out the raider. But Sheridan didn't show up, having fled the town. Caleb justified the destruction of the settlement by claiming that he removed Sheridan's influence to serve as an example, depriving him of power and strength. However, Caleb's fiery speech was cooled off by the NCR, who now declared a reward for his head for the massacre he orchestrated. NCR didn't need such a savage reputation. Sheridan returns to his prison, passing through Legion territory, with which he had been collaborating in the slave trade for a long time. In addition to Powder Ganger's crew of Sam Cooke, Eddie, and Dufresne from the Working on the Chain Gang mod, Isaiah Darby's crew appears. They head southwest and show up in New Rockwell. Instead of looting or just laying low, Isaiah wipes out the sheriff's family and then simply leaves. His crew disperses afterward. While the NCR appointed a new sheriff from California, Jim Ferrar, the town without law enforcement began to fill up with all sorts of criminals hiding from NCR justice and turned into a pirate haven. The town descended into anarchy. Bandits killed the local gunsmith, a bloody cult took over the mines, local prostitutes fled from their pimp, drunken criminals shoot each other right on the doorstep of the bar, and the local doctor waved his hand at everything and realized that making coffins was more profitable than treating people. When the sheriff arrived in town with 2 deputies, he could hardly do anything to disperse the thugs, but at least the situation stabilized. After the battle for Helios 1, Paladin Samuel Green was captured by the NCR and imprisoned. However, he agreed to cooperate with the investigation, and in exchange for defection and leaking information about the Brotherhood of Steel, its bunkers and hiding members of the Order in the region, like Veronica Santangelo, Green was released. He arrived in New Rockwell, where he formed a faction called the Paladins from various criminals. The Paladins are essentially an organized crime group involved in slave trading and collaborating with the Legion, Tex Bradshaw, and Roy Sullivan, who also kept slaves in the basement of his bar. Everyone knew about Green, but the sheriff couldn't do anything with them given the number of people and weapons they had. Going against guys in power armor with plasma guns with a duster and revolvers is not the best idea. The NCR establishes an unremarkable Mojave affairs office near McCarran. Without attracting attention and moving from place to place, the office engaged in covert operations and contract killings. Before 2282, a group of squatters settles in the Summer Springs boarding house in West Vegas. In 2282, shortly before the events of the mod, Frank Doyle's gang seizes Soul's Saloon, making it their base, and dump the bodies of the former owners into the cellar. Roy Sullivan establishes contact with Doyle and pays him for protection of his business in that area. Before the gameplay part of the mods, estimated to start in late spring or early summer 2282, Big Daddy hires a particularly careless and sexually specific mercenary, Marty Page, to infiltrate the Grey Hunts, become a member, and plant a bomb closer to Papa Han. Marty Page bought power armor with the money paid up front and settled in the Crescent Canyon bunker. Blinded by his own coolness and completely destroying the credibility of his legend, he walked towards Red Rock Canyon, posing as a member of the Brotherhood of Steel. However, he crossed paths with Han's scouts, returning from a successful deal. Intrigued by the valuable contents of their bag, he beat them and took the loot. However, he didn't make sure that they were actually dead. He even dropped the bunker key while boasting about who he was and where he came from in a moment of self-aggrandizement. The Legion sends a group of soldiers under the command of Centurion Silus to the North Road to eliminate the rebel Hader. They set up camp in the holding caves. To Silus' disappointment, they lack sufficient personnel and supplies to truly begin hunting for Hader. So they await reinforcements and engage in small-scale trade with Tex Bradshaw. When I discussed the rules for evaluating mods in my previous episode, I mentioned that I would cut out certain elements of the lore from the narrative. This is usually due to the absence of corresponding exposition or the insignificance of the lore element. In other words, if we were to include every minor faction with a low level of development, like the Scorpions from the original Fallout New Vegas, we would simply clutter the wasteland. Instead, we should leave room for future mods. In this series of mods, there are several such elements that we will cut from the narrative. Firstly, there are 3 groups of mercenaries from the Eliza mod: the Devil's Men from Arkansas, Cameron Butcher Butler's group, and Black Killian's Mercs. We will also cut out another former Enclave location, the bunker warehouse near Brooks Tumbleweed Ranch, and the cabin near the Blue Paradise Resort, used by the Legion to write propaganda literature against NCR. Additionally, we will cut out Martin Forrester's gang, which cost a steer 2 generations ago, and Watermelon's gang, for which the Mojave Affairs Office posted a bounty. We will also cut out the pre-war bunker in North Vegas from the headhunting mod, built by one family near the seemingly Chernobyl monolith, and perished after 2077, as well as Point Pilage settlement, which was trading slaves with Casa Madrugada. It was supposed to appear later in one of the future modes, but, you know. From the depth of the Depravity mod, we will cut out the Humboldt Sisters farm and the Dalton gang, as the conflict between them within the framework of the side quest is quite minor. And that's it for today. Next time we'll look at the gameplay part of the lore of the Overseer series. Don't forget to support the channel in every way you feel comfortable, and check the links to additional materials in the description, as well as the links to the mods themselves. Never call yourself Big Daddy if you want to start a raider gang, and see you in the Wastelands, Wanderers. End of the holotape.